Welcome, everyone, to today's show. I have the pleasure of having Nancy Jane Smith. She has a master's degree in higher education and in community counseling from the University of Dayton. She is a licensed professional counselor with 13 years in private practice and has spent 20 plus years working as a counselor coach. She has written 3 books on living happier, most notably, The Happier Approach. Be kind to yourself, feel happier, and still accomplish your goals. A certified Myers-Briggs strong career assessments, and she is a Daring Way facilitator, which I love because I'm all about Brené Brown. So welcome to the show, Nancy.
Thanks for having me. I'm super excited for this conversation.
You are welcome. I just have to go ahead because we always have like the formal intro and then we get to the really good stuff. And so Nancy and I had a pre-meeting last week, and here's what she did, you all. She blew my mind because she is a counselor, but I have to tell all of my listeners this because sometimes I think that we are so close-minded in what we can do and how we can show up and serve in the world. And so, when most of us think of a counselor, we think, oh, Nancy has an office and people come sit in front of her and, this is the traditional counseling format. But last week, you actually said that, no, your practice is completely flipped, that your form of counseling is you have clients who pay you for Voxer support. And so for people listening who don't know what Voxer is, I love Voxer. It's an app where basically I click on and record my voice. So if I want to, I don't want to send a text to my friend Vicky because I have a lot to say. I simply hold down the little record button on the app, and then I can tell Vicky everything that I want to say. She can listen to it on her end, and then she can respond back with a voice message as well. And so I'm a big Voxer person because I don't always like to take the time to type everything out. And so when you were giving me this new model of how you support your clients, it just was like, to me, it kind of, I guess I feel like women in general limit themselves so much of the time, like, oh, that would never work. We could never do that. And so I want you to talk us through that process a little bit, just so we can get a good understanding of your career and how you show up for women.
Yes. Well, I totally agree with you, that idea. And I find it happening to myself all the time, that we limit ourselves. Like we might have an idea and then we talk ourselves out of it. But the Voxer thing came into being because I was finding that, and I go to a therapist regularly myself, and clients would say to me when they'd come into my office, oh, I just have so much anxiety about coming in here today, or I was debating canceling, or or everything's fine and I don't have anything I really want to talk about. And I was I felt that way too with my own therapist sometimes. And meanwhile, I had done this presentation for a group of realtors, and they were saying how they use this app Voxer all the time. And I was like, oh my gosh, that would be a great way to be able to catch my clients during the day and not have to just have this set time that we were meeting. Because the other thing I was finding was there wasn't a lot of consistency in the work that we were doing. So they would come in, they'd have a problem, we would be talking about that problem, but then later on, the next time they came in, we were on to another problem. And with Voxer, I can consistently draw the theme throughout all the Voxer messages, even though a lot of times when they're Voxing me, it's a problem or a concern or something's up, and that's why they're getting in touch. But Voxer, I think, is so powerful for that reason, that I can draw the theme and we can consistently be working on something, even though it doesn't appear that way. And secondly, because I catch people, they can just wake up in the morning and they might be feeling anxious. And so they press the button and they start talking. And that's such a great time to kind of do a download. I say to my clients, the beauty is in the ramble. And the more you can ramble to me, the more we can pull stuff out, because it's when we're so guarded that we don't get to the heart of the matter.
Yeah. And I love that because I have a counselor who's been in my life for 20 years, my sweet Charlie. And, what I like about it is sometimes like by the time I have to wait for my session, I'm like, okay, so why did I book this session and what was I so torn up about, you know? And so like one of the things my husband and I really do is we work on creating an exceptional marriage. But truth be told, Kim is the extreme extrovert processor and Scott is a total introvert who doesn't really like to talk about his feelings, who doesn't want to dive deep on stuff. And so we had a marriage breakdown a couple of weeks ago and I was like, well, I'm not putting up with this bullshit. So I'm going to call Charlie and figure out what to do. So, you know, I had my Charlie session yesterday, but then I was kind of like trying to remember what the resistance was between me and Scott. And I was trying to rehash it, but it happened 2 weeks ago and I was able to do so, but I could see like how nice it is if you can catch your clients right when they're in the middle of the chaos or the stress or the anxiety or the fear or the limiting belief. And then you get to strategically coach them from that spot.
Yeah, yeah. And then the other piece too is I would leave a therapist session and I would be like, oh my gosh, that was such a great aha. Oh my, like I would feel super inspired by what happens. And then I would come home and I would try to talk about it with my husband and it would get lost. Like I would lose the aha. And so to be able then at that point to reach back out to the therapist to be like, now what were we talking about that was so amazing? Like, why was that such an aha?
Yes.
You know, continues that thread. So I think to both points, it's a powerful model. I will never go back to the other way. Since figuring this out.
Yeah. And I just want to clarify for our listeners, because like it took me a while to wrap my head around it. Basically, folks, she is a counselor slash coach who doesn't meet clients face to face. She simply offers them Voxer access so that they can reach out to her and then she can strategically coach them back through Voxer. And I guess I wanted we're not going to talk, that's not the point of my interview with you. We're going to get into like way more fascinating things like self-compassion and self-love and self-loyalty. But the reason I wanted to bring this to my listeners, Nancy, is because so many times women do not believe in their ability to take a dream that they have and not make it match what the world or society or someone else tells them that it should, but instead to match it with what feels right to who they are as a person and how they want to show up in the world. And I feel like that's what you did with your business.
Yeah. And and you know, just to segue into what we're going to be talking about, it for me, that happened. I was able to do that more so after I started developing self-loyalty. So after I started getting clear on what is it that I want to do in the world, how is it that I want to be helping people, and how can I do more of that? And stop, you know, even if you're not an entrepreneur or, you know, any in this industry, we always go to the experts. We always go outside of ourselves. What are they doing? What are they doing? Let me see what they're doing. Even if we have an idea, we still will go out into the world to see what other people are doing. And instead of combining what they're doing with what we're doing, we will shut down our own idea and defer to their idea. And so no new ideas get started.
Exactly. And I'm going to drop all of Nancy's like contact info. If some of you are thinking, hey, Kim, I know I need this lady's name. I need a Voxer counselor. We will drop that in. But I can't wait to dive into this topic. So you brought up the term self-loyalty. And one of the things that, you know, I talk so much about, you know, I call it self-love. You call it self-loyalty. And I love that term. And I want to know where it comes from. But I have this inner belief that every issue that we have in our life, whether it's our inability to create an exercise routine, our inability to attract a partner who treats us well, our inability to chase after our dream, our inability to eat health. Like I feel like every issue a person can have, career, health, relationships, anything, it all has to do with, it goes back to your self-love issues. So I want to know what you think of that. And then I also want to know why you call it self-loyalty.
Yeah, amen. I totally agree with you. I mean, I'm just over here nodding my head all over the place. Yeah, I totally agree that it all starts with self-love. And the reason I started using the phrase self-loyalty is because two reasons. One is I have my clients fill out a values exercise so they can name their top 5 values. And for a majority of my clients, loyalty is a top 5 value. They really value being loyal to other people, and they will go to the ends of the earth for other people, but they turn their backs on themselves all the time. So there was no self-loyalty, there was loyalty to other people. And so I grabbed a hold of that because they know what loyalty means. Like, they have that definition really well. It's just flipping it around to turn it on themselves. And then the second reason is the term self-love is just so used so often. Like, it's just this, it's become a generic term of self-love. We need to have self-love. And I struggle personally with, how do I love myself? I don't really get it. I don't understand how that's going to work. And so, here I am, a therapist, saying I don't understand the concept of self-love, but it brought up a lot of stuff for me, especially around that. Like, I'm a therapist who doesn't understand how to do self-love, but I could get the concept of self-loyalty. So, and I think they're the same. It's just wording.
But I want you to define for us, Nancy, what is self-loyalty to you? What is that? And give us not just the definition of what you think it is, but examples of that.
I think self-loyalty is befriending yourself. It is not turning your back on yourself. It is when a decision comes down the pike and you have to decide, tonight I got to make dinner. I got to get the kids organized. We got to figure out schooling. I don't know. We have all these things that we're working on right now with the COVID stuff. And so it's what do I need? I need to make a healthy dinner. Not just because someone out there told me a healthy dinner matters, but because I know I feel better when I eat these certain things. And so I'm going to make sure that the meal has these certain things. Okay, well, I'm out of time. I don't have time to make a meal that has these certain things. I'm such a loser. I said I committed to eating healthy and now I can't eat healthy. What's my problem? So that it's, again, not turning your back on yourself, not being like you're such a loser. It is turning and saying, okay, given the time issues we have, what can I cook for dinner? It's going to be pizza tonight. That's what we got. We got pizza. I'm going to get a good salad, so at least I get some veggies, and I'm going to let it go. I'm not going to be hammering myself and beating myself up for the fact that I didn't get it right. I'm going to own, in self-loyalty, I'm going to own when I make a mistake, and I'm going to say, I messed up there. And then I'm going to figure out how I could do it differently next time. And I'm going to let it go. I'm not going to hammer myself for the fact that I made a mistake. I'm going to be able to discern between when I've done something wrong and when I'm just beating myself up for the sake of beating myself up. And I'm going to own the difference. So I think self-loyalty is a mix of kindness and wisdom, that we can be kind to ourselves, and then we can discern, where do I need to go next in a wise way that may not be always perfection. It may not be always the ideal end game, but it's enough that I don't have to be hammering myself all the time.
I love that. I worked with a coaching client one time, and she told me that her kids were out of the house, and, they were grown and gone. And she said, Kim, I can't find any time for myself every day. I can't do it. I have no time for myself. She started to tell me, and she gave me a list of 10 committees that she serves on. She's the Bible study group leader. She's the Red Cross, whatever. And so to me, again, this issue was that she has, for one thing, she's out hustling for her worthiness, as Brene Brown would say.
Yes.
And she certainly doesn't feel like she's a good enough person if she gets rid of some of these commitments so that she can give that time to herself.
Yes.
And again, that's a self-loyalty issue or self-love issue. That's what we're talking about, and I have this kind of motto that every time you're a yes to something that you don't want to do, you are also inadvertently a no to something you do want to do. So do we all say yes to shit we don't want to do sometimes? Of
Yes.
course we do, right? But we have some people who are yes shitters all of the time, right? They're saying yes all the time to shit they don't want to do.
Yes, right. Yeah. And I think because something that drives me crazy about the self-help industry and personal development industry is we make everything seem like it's an absolute. So we say, set boundaries, speak your needs. And we do that as if, poof, I'm suddenly going to become someone that can say no to something when I've been constantly saying yes to things. And we forget the concept of baby steps, that this stuff, practicing self-loyalty and learning how to show up for yourself in a kind way is totally counter to the programming that we have internally and societally. And so we need to be kind to ourselves in this process of figuring out what does self-love and self-loyalty look like. So that idea, that exercise of every time I say yes to something I don't want to do, I'm saying no to something I do want to do. Yeah, let's start paying attention to what that feels like when I say no to something I want to do.
Yeah.
That's the piece we block over. We gloss
don't want to feel
over that.
uncomfortable, do we?
Yeah, no, correct.
Like I tell people all the time, when you start doing it, it's not going to feel good at first.
Right.
But like, that's how we grow. We have to be willing to get uncomfortable until we create a new social script inside of us that says, actually, this is now, this no is now, I'm a super proud of that no, because that means that I value myself enough to know that I don't have to do that.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And I had a client, recently who had a conversation with her boss, and she said no to something. Like, he asked her to do something and she said no. And she was super celebrating it with me. It was this whole big deal. And then she comes back this week and she's like, I had another conversation with him. And based on our first conversation, he negotiated with me. What if we did these things? What if we took off these things and added these things? Would you be willing to do this next task? And she said, and I said, yes. And she's like, and she was worried I was going to be mad at her, like I would ever be mad at someone, but I was mad at her for not holding the boundary. But I said, no, you were loyal to yourself. You negotiated with him. And because you originally said no, he came back to, he was willing to negotiate it, which we don't even think of that part of the process.
Right. Yeah. We're just ready to beat ourselves up because we didn't do it perfectly.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. And it's so much more nuanced than that.
So can you give me examples? Because I really want our audience to understand what kind of issues come to fruition because of a lack of self-loyalty or self-love. Like, when I don't have a reservoir of self-love that I am nurturing inside of myself, how does my inability to do that wreak havoc in my life? What are some examples?
Well, I think it wreaks havoc in our life in that a lot of times we're not living a life that we want to be living. We're doing everything for everybody else. And we have our heads down, we're looking at the to-do list and we're just checking things off. And we're not ever looking up to be like, do I want to be engaging in these activities? Who are these activities for? Do these activities need to be happening? Like the woman with all the committees. You're just in a pattern of doing these committees. You don't even bother to ask, do I want to be doing these committees? And that's a big example of that. But that takes place with all of this, like getting on social media or, how we hang out with friends or how we interact with our spouses. Like, we do these things because we think we're supposed to do them versus checking in, do I really want to be engaging in this activity? And that can go from, like you said, with the health to the career, all over the place. And I think when we don't have self-loyalty, that allows our inner critic, and I call our inner critic the monger, because mongers spread propaganda, and that's what our monger does. For my clients that the self-loyalty concept has kind of gone out the window and they're living for everyone else, they have extremely loud mongers. So they have the voice in their head that's constantly ridiculing them and telling them what they're doing, that they're doing it wrong, because they don't have any way to come internally and be like, this is okay. I'm going against the grain here and I'm going to be okay. Having that source as you said, source of self-love, source of self-loyalty. I call that character the biggest fan. Having that biggest fan that we can rely on, who says, it's okay that you didn't do it perfectly. It's okay that you didn't get a shower today and you got 5 Zoom calls and you got to figure this out. Pull your hair back. Let's get going.
Yes.
That.
I have to do a lot of work with women in my 90-day coaching program because their inner critic is completely leading their life. They're not leading their life. Their inner critic is. And so we do a lot of work around that. And I actually have them name their inner critic because my inner critic's name is Ethel. And so like Ethel has like, snakes for hair, and she smokes cigarettes, and she's mean and rough and growly. And so like the other day I was taking my run, and I've really been struggling with running. I'm an athlete and I am competitive, and my running has just been terrible for the last couple of months, and it's been hot and humid, blah, blah, blah. But still, I'm like having to stop during my runs and take a breath. And Ethel was like in full force. She was like, oh, Kim, you're just getting the middle-aged, you're not going to be able to run anymore. And you're just letting your body go to hell, and you're eating terribly, and you're so weak. And what happened to you? You don't have a strong mindset anymore. And she was just like saying all of this nasty stuff to me. And I had a counselor one time who introduced me to the concept, because like Kim doesn't know sometimes how to extend self-compassion to Kim. I can extend it to you and to my husband and my son and my friends and my neighbor, but I would never talk to them the way that I allow Ethel to talk to me. And so I want to know why we have this struggle. Why is self-compassion? Because that's what we're talking about. Why is it so hard for us?
Well, I don't think we were ever taught self-compassion. Like that isn't something societally, we are raised on the idea of keep hustling, keep pushing, keep going. And we're kind of taught if we give ourselves self-compassion, we're going to be soft. And that means we're not going to keep pushing forward.
And maybe we should define that. What is self-compassion?
I think self-compassion is self-loyalty, is self-love. It is being able to say to yourself, oh, this is hard right now. This, really showing up for yourself and being able to identify, just being able to, I say self-compassion is it's being able to talk to yourself like your 8-year-old, like you would talk to your 8-year-old niece. And I say niece because it's not your kid. It's not your, it's not a random 8-year-old. It's a person you have a relationship with, and you want to be mentoring, but you also want to just shower with love. And that's the idea, that when I can show up to myself, and I like even when you're running and you're having a hard time and you're competing and Ethel's going crazy, to be able to say, gosh, it is really hard to run when it's this hot outside, or it's really hard to get myself to get out there when I'm feeling so low energy. Because we forget that we have moods and we have energy levels, and we go up and down, and some days it's really hard and some days it's really easy. And a lot of us treat ourselves as if we should be consistently the same all the time, superhuman.
Yes. And I think what you're saying there, which really helps, is you're saying create some space within you and say, hey, so when you say 8-year-old niece, I'm thinking of my little niece, Cora, who is like a second daughter to me. And when I'm having that moment where I'm disappointed in myself and my Ethel is talking so strongly, think about if my niece Cora was having that same moment, and how would I, as her Aunt Kimmy, comfort her? What would I say to her? And actually that dialogue right there is what helps me, because then I know what I would say to her. So how can I now extend that same kindness to myself, is what you're saying.
Yeah, because a lot of times what we do, which is, we dismiss what we're feeling. So it's not okay that this is hard to run today. It's not okay that I'm struggling with this. I should be better than that. I should be able to overcome this. And for me, everything started switching with my own relationship with my inner critic when I was able to just just own what was happening in that moment, to say, gosh, it's really hard today to run. What's that about? Why is it, and not get like, why is it so hard? And let me solve the problem, but just observing today is hard. It's a hard day to run. And I'm going to be kind to myself today because I'm struggling. And when we have that self-loyalty or that self-love, we don't get all tripped up with the fact that it's hard today, because we know it might be easier tomorrow. Not everything, we don't have to hold everything so tight because we're trying to keep this perfect facade going all the time.
You're making me think of parenting. I grew up with two really great parents, but they were like all other parents. They were trained by their parents, which is, we're not really going to talk about our negative feelings.
Mm-hmm.
If you fall down and scrape your knee, quit crying and get up and let's go. Or, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so this kind of idea of loving kindness, like, what if I was allowed as a little girl to be angry or to feel sad? And that those feelings in us that, generations before us, we didn't do feelings at all.
Mm-mm.
And I'm not even sure that my age group did a lot of feelings. We
Right.
are affectionate with our children and we tell them, I love them. But when the going gets tough, we don't actually want to sit down and really process those negative feelings. And
Mm-hmm.
I know that's something that I've had to work on with my own son. But
Mm-hmm.
this is why we don't have these skills for ourselves, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Yeah.
Never modeled for us. We were never like, even with my husband and I, Kim, you're obviously feeling very angry. Can you tell me more about that? No, instead, he reciprocates with his own defensiveness
Mm-hmm.
because we are uncomfortable around negative feelings rather than letting ourselves feel them, which I think you're so spot on when you say this is necessary. We
Mm-hmm.
must feel the feelings.
And it doesn't have to be, I think, because feelings are such a mystery, and we weren't taught how to do it. It's not normalized. Learning how to suddenly we go to extremes. So what is modeled is, well, I'm feeling angry, and so I'm going to get really angry and I'm going to yell, and this is healthy. I'm expressing my feelings, and that isn't the point. That we've taken it too far to the other side when we do that. The idea is, like an example with your husband, is to just be like, I'm angry. We can talk about that. I don't have to take this to a 10 and you scream and yell. I can just express the fact that this is what I'm angry about. And you can come back at me with what you're angry about, or how, and we can hash it out.
Yes.
But the problem with the modeling that we have is, either we don't talk about it because we don't have time and we don't want to go there, or it is so blown out and becomes this more dramatic that we haven't learned there's a middle ground where I can just own today's hard. The other day I was walking the dog. I walk the dog every morning, and I was having a rough morning, and I was like, come on, get it together. My monger was in there telling me I needed to be perfect, and be grateful. You have nothing to be upset about, blah, 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 blah. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere came the voice that said, gosh, it's really hard to feel this way when you have a lot to be grateful about. And it was just like, yeah, that's exactly it. Like, I don't want to feel this way. I don't know why I'm feeling this way, but I am. So let's just bring that to the forefront and be able to say, it's just really hard to feel this way, whatever this way means.
Yes.
But I'm at least acknowledging something's off. But we're so quick to come in and tell ourselves that's not appropriate. We have more to do. And then we ignore it until it becomes this ginormous, then we're screaming at our husband about the fact they didn't empty the dishwasher, when really what we're mad about is the fact that they, didn't listen to us this morning when we were sharing a fear we had about a conference we had.
Yes. Yes. Oh, we need a lot of help with all of that. And I know, poor Scott Strobel, he just doesn't know that he gets to be on this podcast so much of the time, but he really did grow up in a family that did not express any feelings at all. And so having dialogue back and forth that is sometimes difficult is a skill set that he continues to work on, because things do blow up quickly if there is a disagreement. And then things get over exaggerated, and then he's pretty laid back. And I feel like I have to, lose my whole mind to get him to pay attention to what I'm saying. And so everything you're describing is spot on for that. But I want to also offer the audience. And so when I was in my own counseling session and I had been really beating myself up, and the counselor was trying to teach me how to have more self-compassion, which that's always the number one thing the counselor's working with me on. You're so judgy, you know, I'm so judgy on Kim. And so what was interesting though is so you know how I have a voice for the inner critic named Ethel? I couldn't extend that self-compassion to Kim. So she had me think of someone that I know who has just the most gentle, kind, loving heart. And so immediately I thought of my friend Jamila. Like Jamila is one of those people that, I mean, I feel like if you did like the worst thing on earth, she would still like wrap her arms around you, and she would talk in this like really soothing and kind voice. And she would remind you of all of your goodness. And so now what I have to do is I actually have to, like, now I've named the nice person, which is Jamila. So now Jamila has to come in and she has to tell Kim the things that Kim can't tell herself, you know? And so I think now I have Kim and I have Jamila and I have Ethel that all live in my head. Probably, 50 others voices that we all have going.
Totally. Yeah. Because that's why, I mean, I love that idea of the separating out the voices. Cause because in the book I wrote that you talked about at the beginning, the happier approach, I talk about the three of the many voices, as you said, that we have. We have the monger, which is your Ethel. And then I have the biggest fan, which is your how do you say her name?
Jamila
is who I have the biggest fan. And then I have a third voice, which is, I call her the BFF voice. And this is the voice of false self-compassion. And that's the voice that gets us into trouble, because the monger will come up and say, you're a loser. You can't run. You're just going to be, a fat, out of shape, old woman, blah, 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 all the terrible stuff she says. And then the BFF comes in and is like, yeah, let's just take tomorrow off. Let's just not run. And we're just going to, sit and have some pancakes and it'll all be fine. And we'll just and then the monger comes in to be like, no. And then they go back and forth and they keep fighting. And because we don't understand the concept of self-compassion, which is messy and imperfect, we think self-compassion is this do whatever you want, pay no consequences idea. And that's I lived in that spot for a long time where my monger and my BFF were fighting back and forth. And that, in my opinion, is where anxiety lives.
Yeah, because they were both fighting for control of you.
Yes, exactly. Yes. Yeah.
Interesting. That is so interesting. I think, this is just so helpful, this conversation, understanding. It's really just getting the people who are listening, it's getting you to become aware of how quickly and how often we berate ourselves. And if you, again, I love that analogy. If you wouldn't talk to your 8-year-old niece who is having that struggle in that way, why do you think it's okay to talk to yourself? Because if anybody works hard for you, you work the hardest for yourself. You're doing and creating and taking care of things, and your whole day is spent doing, sometimes for others, but you can't extend enough gratitude and graciousness that there are some cracks or flaws or struggles or failures or imperfections that also reside in you.
Because I think that's a big, I can remember years ago, I did a presentation about mongers, and I was talking about the inner critic, and a group of my girlfriends were at the presentation. And one of my best friends came up to me after, and she was like, great presentation. I loved it. I have a really loud monger. I could totally relate. I'm not doing anything you said to do because I need that monger or I won't get anything done. And I looked at her and was like, and I laughed, and we kind of went on, and I got home and I was like, I totally agree with her. Like, here I am teaching about how to not have this nasty inner critic. And I'm secretly in this love affair with her because she is, I believe, is helping me stay motivated and on top of it. And my theory is, and this is all theory, that we have that belief because if we ridicule ourselves all the time, we never have to really, we don't see the nuanceness of ourselves. We don't see that, yeah, we are imperfect and we mess up and we don't do it right. And we do great things too. It's all messy. And we want it to be really simple that I'm a loser who needs to be harassed all the time. And, and that's the image I'm going to, that's what I believe internally. But externally, I'm going to put up this front that I have it all together and I'm perfectly on top of it. And I'm totally organized, and we don't want anyone to see any flaws anywhere.
Yes.
And until we're ready to show those flaws and talk to ourselves like we would the 8-year-old niece around those flaws, we will always be running from them, and we will always buy into the lies of the inner critic.
So, okay, I have one more question then. So do you think that the inner critic does serve a helpful purpose in some situations?
I think the inner critic has, I think sometimes her message is correct. Her tone is the problem.
Oh, I like that. That is so good.
So sometimes, I'm not saying every time, she can be irrational and she can just harass us, but sometimes she's like, you really did, like I had a client recently who had a job interview. She didn't get the job. And we were working on, helping her get her biggest fan going and not listening to her monger. And it was a few days later and her monger was still really loud. And she said, I realized there were things in the interview I didn't do right and I could have improved on. And once she owned that, once she was saying, these are the things I didn't do right and these are the things I could improve on, which is what her monger had been telling her.
Yes.
But the tone was terrible. Then the monger went away.
Oh, that's so good. So it's okay to get feedback from ourselves, but we have to be aware of the tone that we're using to give ourselves that feedback.
Yes.
Oh, that is so good. Now, I'm going to read this thing called Ubuntu. Ubuntu, that's how I think it's stated, Ubuntu. And I think this kind of relates. So when we're talking about loving kindness, when we're talking about not focusing so much on our flaws and mistakes and imperfections, and yes, looking at them and reflecting upon them and saying, how can we do better, but not letting those things change who we are at the core of ourselves. I think so much of the time, we step into shame and blame because we think that if we use shame and blame, that's going to change our behavior. And in fact, we use shame and blame with others, right? Whether it's our kids or, and what I always say is shame and blame never causes a behavior change. And so there is this term, it's an African term, I believe, called Ubuntu. And I'm going to read this to you all because I feel like it's so powerful. And if we can envision just doing this even for ourselves, but it says in certain regions of South Africa, when someone does something wrong, he is taken to the center of the village and surrounded by his tribe for 2 days while they speak of all the good he has done. They believe each person is good, yet sometimes we make mistakes, which is really a cry for help. They unite in this ritual to encourage the person to reconnect with his true nature. The belief is that unity and affirmation have more power to change behavior than shame and punishment. This is known as Ubuntu, humanity toward others. And it just makes me think, if we can stop shaming and blaming ourselves for the behaviors that we don't like, understanding that that is not what's going to motivate us. It's not healthy. It's not how we heal. But if we can just imagine a tribe of others, just even yourself, if you have to remind yourself of all that you do in a day's time. And why do we, have to pick ourselves apart? Let's acknowledge where our mistakes are. Let's learn from those, but let's also not block out all the goodness that is a part of each and every one of us. I just loved that.
That's beautiful. That's really cool.
We have a lot to learn from those South Africans, if that's the case.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, Miss Nancy. So I am going to end this with a rapid fire 5 questions. Are you ready?
I'm ready. Woo!
Okay. What's a show that you're currently binge watching?
My husband and I, we just started rewatching House. Old
You
episodes.
can rewatch shows?
Yeah, I know. It blew my mind.
Wow, you're one of the rewatchers. I could never do that.
I haven't watched a lot of them. My husband is rewatching. We haven't gotten to the repeats yet, but it has been so fun. Like it's just a mindless show, and we've watched it every night. We watch a couple episodes. It's been really fun.
Fun routine. What is your favorite food?
Pizza.
Okay. What is one of your biggest fears?
Ooh, one of my biggest fears. The first thing that popped in my head was making a fool of myself.
Yeah.
And then my next question was, what would that be? And I don't have an example, but I think that's a fear that holds me back.
Yeah. Feeling fear of humiliation, I guess, huh?
Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That humiliation is a very terrible feeling to feel.
Yeah.
What is something that most people would not know about you?
Ooh, what is something most people wouldn't know about me?
It can be something from far in your past or more recent.
When I have a complete blank. So I guess I would say I traveled to South Africa.
You did?
In the spirit of the Ubuntu.
My goodness.
Because when you said that, I didn't remember what it meant, which the reading was really powerful. But I was like, oh yeah, I remember from when I got to travel there with, I worked in college student personnel for a while. And so I was with a bunch of college students who were studying apartheid. And so it was not a traditional trip. Like we stayed in the townships with families, and we worked, regular jobs, and it was all in the experience of through the lens of apartheid. It was a really powerful trip.
I bet. Wow. And then my very last question is, how are you, Nancy, reaching for more joy in your life?
Ooh, how am I reaching for more joy? I just started this. I just realized recently I tested for a wheat intolerance. And so I have been taking wheat out of my diet. I just started this week. And the interesting thing with that has not brought me more joy. Just FYI.
I was going to say, bring this back around.
How is this going? But what it has done is it's reinvigorated me in that, not to bring it all back to self-loyalty, but it has reinvigorated me to start asking that question more of what brings me more joy, in the sense of I recognize how I've just gotten the wheat. I'm actually feeling better getting off of the wheat. And so I'm tapping into more energy than I've had in the past. And I think that it is reminding me of who I am. And I have arthritis and irritable bowel syndrome and all these, and some health issues that have really been controlling me in the past few years. And so taking back control of my life with this, by doing this experiment, I don't know if it's going to work, but doing this experiment has brought me more joy, because I am tuning back into myself to be like, what else is there that I'm, kind of that expansiveness, which is interesting, because I wouldn't have thought restricting a food group would make me feel more expansive, but in so many ways it has.
Yeah.
So it's a weird answer to the question, but
well, you think about people who do fasting and us good Catholics who, so yeah, I mean, I think there is something to that. Okay. And very last, where can people find you?
So they can find me at my website, live-happier.com, and they can, my book is there, The Happier Approach. And I also have a podcast called The Happier Approach Podcast that is available wherever you listen to podcasts.
Excellent. And we will drop all of that in the show notes. Nancy, it's been a real pleasure. I appreciate your ability to go deep with us on helping us understand these topics and how they play out in our life. So thank you so much.
Thank you. This was awesome.